Hello, my lovelies. Whew, that last recording was a roller coaster. Hopefully, this one's going to go more smoothly, right? We're going to start with chapter 62. Let me write that down because sometimes when I'm writing my captions and stuff, it gets messed up. 62. See, it's called The Showdown. Daybreak in the foothills and thick gray fog was everywhere. With such poor visibility, the travelers relied on each other's senses. They smelled salty air, they felt sandy soil, they heard seagulls screeching and waves breaking, and then they heard the long, low note of a ship's horn. Somewhere in the distance, hidden by the fog, was the ocean. As if to answer the ship, there came another long, low note. But it wasn't a horn, it was a howl. A wolf was following our friends. Brightbill beat his wings and squawked, "Mama, run!" Roz ran downhill, deeper into the gloom. Her feet stomped the sandy soil, leaving behind a trail of footprints. There was no time to hide her tracks, so she just kept running. Blurry shapes faded in and out of the fog, and her eyes darted around to see if they were rocks or bushes or wolves. But the robot should have watched where she was going. She slipped and thumped into the sand, and before she could get up, Shadow was on top of her. The wolf was heavy and he pinned Roz to the ground and locked his teeth onto her tool belt. At last he had caught his prey. Violently, wildly, he thrashed the robot from side to side. Roz tried to squirm free, but Shadow's grip was tight. There was only one thing to do. She reached down beside the wolf's snarling jaws and fumbled with the buckle, and suddenly she was loose. Shadow staggered backward, the belt dangling from his mouth as Roz stomped away. Brightbill had been circling overhead this whole time, and now he squawked desperate warnings to his mother. "Look out for the rocks! Shadow is gaining on you! There are buildings ahead!" Roz burst through a row of hedges and onto the main street of a seaside village. It was still early, and it was still foggy, and Roz was halfway through the village before anyone saw her. A man had just left for his morning walk when the robot and the wolf came galloping down the street. The man decided his walk could wait, and he hurried back inside. Shadow swiped at Roz's heels, but the robot leaped away. She soared over a house and landed on the other side. The wolf dashed around the yard, only to see her leaping away once more. This time, Roz landed in shallow water. Waves gently sloshed against her ankles. The robot backed into the ocean up to her waist and then automatically stopped. Her survival instincts wouldn't let her go any farther. "There's nowhere left to run," Shadow growled as he prowled onto the beach. "Either fight or swim." Roz was trapped. Her body leached forward and backward as her computer brain struggled to find an escape, and then Brightbill came to her rescue. "This way, Mama." Roz didn't hesitate. She launched herself up from the shallows toward her son's voice. Salt water streamed off her body as she soared through the air. Then her feet pounded into the sand beside Bill, who was perched atop an old robot. By the time Shadow arrived, our friends were rowing away from shore. The wolf's face twisted with rage as he howled at the water's edge. "You made a fool of me, Roz. My pack and my mate have left me. Now I'm just a worthless lone wolf, all because of you." Roz felt sorry for Shadow. She never meant for any of this to happen, but she had her own troubles. The robot's greatest fear was deep water, and now she was paddling through the waves and out to sea. Chapter 63, The Robot. The rowboat, not robot, rowboat. The sun was shining, the fog was thinning, the robot was rowing. Roz was no thief, and she didn't like taking that old robot, but judging from its appearance, it had been abandoned years ago. She hoped it wouldn't be missed. Anybody who's rowed one of those boats knows you're supposed to face backward. That can make it tough to see where you're going. This wasn't a problem for Roz, however. She started off rowing normally, and after several strokes of the oars, her head spun around until she was facing forward. And what she saw was blue sky and dark waves and a sliver of green on the horizon. "We're in the bay," said Bright Bill, swooping down into the boat. "To the north is that distant coastline. To the east is open water. To the west is a seaport. And to the south is the village and the wolf." It seemed the travelers had no choice but to cross the bay. Luckily, Roz could row long and fast. Bright Bill settled in for the ride, and the robot's mechanical muscles started pumping. She pulled and pulled and pulled on the oars, and the robot glided through the waters. Roz was nervous. Time and again, the robot's survival instincts had stopped her from going into deep water. Now an old robot was all that rowboat was all that separated her from the murky depths. She couldn't wait to feel solid ground beneath her feet again. As they rowed deeper into the bay, the waves got larger and rougher. Gigantic swells of water rolled in from the open ocean and started tossing the boat around like a toy. The waves finally became too much for Bright Bill. He spread his wings, lifted up on the breeze, and anxiously looked at the choppy surf ahead. "Row faster," he squawked. "I don't know how much more the boat can take." Roz tried to power through. She rowed faster and faster until the boat was skimming across the water. Too fast. The left oar snapped, then the right, and suddenly the boat was moving at the mercy of the waves. "Hold on, Mama," cried the goose. "Here comes a big one." Yikes. The robot was pulled up the side of a towering wall of water. It teetered at the top, and then the rowboat went crashing down the other side with such force that the whole thing splintered apart. Roz felt water surging around her. She clung to debris and kicked her legs, but she wouldn't stay afloat for long. The robot began to sink. The goose floated above. The ocean rolled and sloshed. Then there was a sudden burst of air from somewhere nearby. Bright Bill looked toward the sound, but saw only sea spray drifting on the breeze. And when he looked back to his mother, she was dipping below the surface. "What can I do, Mama?" Bright Bill cried from the air. "Tell me what to do." "There is nothing more you can do," said Roz, gargling voice. "I am sorry." The young goose could only watch as the ocean dragged the robot down, down, down. Chapter 64 is called The Sea Creature. Bright Bill hovered on the wind and watched his poor mother sinking into the depths. He could still see her body sparkling brightly against the darkness, but she was fading fast. The goose closed his eyes, hoping this was all a bad dream. He heard the distant horns of ships by the seaport. He heard buoys clanging in the harbor. He heard ocean waves churning and frothing louder and louder and louder and louder. The goose opened his eyes and saw the ocean bulging upward. A giant sea creature was rising from the depth. It breached the surface and sent waves rolling away. The creature had a large mouth and long fins and a wide back that curved down into the water. There was a loud burst, and mist shot up from a blowhole. As you might have guessed, reader, that giant creature was a whale. More of the whale emerged from the darkness until something sparkled in the sunlight. It was Roz. She was sprawled on the whale's back, wet, limp, and lifeless. Chapter 65 is called The Whale. The whale swam along the surface of the ocean, keeping our robot safely above the water, gently moving her away from the rough waves. Bright Bill couldn't believe what he was seeing. Once the shock wore off, he fluttered down onto the whale's back and leaned over his mother. There was no life left in her eyes or her body, so the goose did the only thing he could think of. Click! Roz's eyes began to glow. She uttered some human noises, and then in the language of the animals, the robot said, "Oh, Brightbill, I am so happy to see you." The goose squawked with joy and hugged his mother's face, but she didn't move. She couldn't move. The robot had lost the use of her limbs. There were a few tense minutes and a few nervous glances, but as the sun beat down and the wind rushed over her, Roz felt her body drying out. Slowly, gradually, power returned to her arms, then her legs, and then she sat up and hugged her son. Brightbill breathed a sigh of relief. "Mama, when you disappeared below the water, I thought you were gone forever." "So did I," said Roz. "As I sank deeper and deeper, the ocean squeezed my body tighter and tighter. I lost control of my legs and my arms. The last thing I remember was a huge shape swimming toward me, and then I automatically shut down." "That huge shape was a whale," squawked the goose. "We're riding on her back right now." A low moan rumbled up through the whale's body. She splashed the water with her fins and took long, squeezing, wheezing breaths and sprayed mist high into the air. Roz paid close attention to the whale's behavior and understood what she was saying. The whale's name was Coral, and she was thrilled to meet our friends. She explained that a flock of geese had flown over the bay and regaled the coastal birds with the amazing story of the wild robot and her son, the goose. Oh, it's telling me to stop now because I'm running out of time. Okay, I'm back. I think I got this put together. I'm only going to read about 5 minutes more and then I'll put the clips together. The coastal birds shared the story with the fish and the dolphins and anyone who would listen. In time, the story spread to every creature in the bay. When Coral saw the robot rowing and the goose flying overhead, she knew it had to be Roz and Brightbill. So she swam behind them in case she could be helpful. It was a good thing she did. Look that's her shadow under the water there with Brightbill and Roz on top. Make sure. As Coral ferried our friends across the bay, the waves grew smaller and the coastline grew longer. Houses poked out from the trees. Sunbathers relaxed on the rocks. Boats motored away from the piers. With so many humans around, Roz had to be careful. She lay flat against Coral's back while Brightbill flew ahead and scouted out the coastline. The goose directed the whale to a quiet, empty cove, and soon the robot was standing on dry land again. Roz asked if there was some way she could repay Coral for saving her life, but the whale was just happy to help. She winked one of her enormous eyes, and then she sank beneath the waves. Our friends marched inland feeling lucky and grateful, but as they thought of the journey still to come, their good feeling gradually turned gloomy. Roz had nearly died crossing that bay. At some point, to get back to the island, she would have to cross an entire ocean. Wow, that's how far away they were? I had no idea. Let's do chapter 66, The New Land. Zoom, voom, shoom. Automobiles were gliding up and down the road, passing fields and forests and clusters of houses. None of the passengers had any idea that a robot and a goose were watching from the weeds. Our friends had been hiding there for some time, waiting for the traffic to clear. But the automobiles kept coming. Roz noticed a drainage pipe that crossed under the road. The pipe was dark and grimy, but the travelers were getting desperate. Moving through this land was difficult. There were more humans and robots and buildings and roads than ever before. Roz and Brightbill traveled far out of their way in wide circles just to avoid small towns. As the days passed, the scenery looked more familiar to Brightbill. He remembered flying over these lands on his first migration. He knew the towns would only get larger and closer together the farther they went. It would be much faster to sneak through the towns than to continue going around them. So as night fell, Roz put on flesh camouflage, and with her son watching from the sky, she crept into a town. The town is chapter 67. Let's read that and then we'll stop. Pookie was a big little dog. Her body was round, her legs were short, her ears were long. Although the dog looked funny, she was serious about protecting her home. She slapped her front paws on the windowsill and stared into the night to make sure all was well outside. But all was not well. A new clump of weeds had mysteriously sprouted in the yard. Pookie needed to take a closer look. The dog whined by the back door until someone let her out. Then she scurried across the porch, down the steps, and over to the mysterious weeds. As Pookie approached, a raspy growl sounded in her throat. "Where did all these weeds come from?" she said to herself, sniffing. "They weren't here this morning." The weeds rustled in the breeze, and that was enough to set Pookie off. The dog barked and barked and barked and barked, and then, astonishingly, the weeds spoke to her in a clear, calm voice. "I'm sorry to disturb you," said the weeds. Pookie stopped barking. "I was hoping to pass through without being seen," said the weeds, "but you saw me. You are a very good guard dog." Pookie resumed barking. "No, no, no. Shh," said the weeds. "Please stop barking." But there was no stopping Pookie. The clump of weeds decided to move like some sort of monster. The weeds rose up on two legs and leaped over the fence into the neighboring yard. Felix had heard Pookie barking next door, and when the weedy monster landed in his yard, he started barking as well. So the monster kept going, leaping fences from one yard to the next. Every house in the neighborhood seemed to have a dog, and they all began barking about the weedy monster. Reader, you and I both know the monster was actually our robot in disguise, but the dogs never figured out what happened that night. Roz finally slunk into the shadows behind a school building and listened as the chorus of dogs settled down. "That didn't go very well," said the goose as he landed beside his mother. "No, it did not," said the robot. "This will only be tougher in daylight." "I know. I'll have to try something else tonight." Early the next morning, the sun started rising, automobiles started driving, robots started running errands. However, one of the robots was not like the rest. Roz had picked every speck of dirt from her body, and now she blended in with all the normal robots going about their normal morning routines. Our robot was hiding in plain sight. Roz marched through town, turning left and right down the streets as Brightbill watched from above. Along the way, she passed a wide variety of robots, all going about their business. There was even another Rosum robot marching around who looked identical to our Roz, except she was shinier and had a different unit number. It occurred to Rosum Unit 7134 that if anyone noticed her unit number, it might bring a swift response from the Ricos. But as she continued past houses and shops and humans and robots, there didn't seem to be any danger. Everything was going smoothly until she heard an airship flying toward the town. Our robot felt something like dread as she waited for the sleek white ship to appear. If the Ricos found her now, there would be no escape. But the ship that appeared wasn't white. It was black, and it flew over without stopping. Roz was safe, and suddenly she was dreaming about airships. Returning to the island would be so easy with a ship. She and Brightbill would climb in, fire up the engines, and be home in no time at all. But it was an impossible dream. There was no safe way for our robot to get an airship. She had to find some other way home. First, she had to find her way out of this town. So Roz focused on her surroundings and continued marching along the sidewalks just like a robot. All right, my lovies, that went pretty smoothly. Fingers crossed it continues to. Here are your kisses. I don't know if I've missed some along these choppy ways. If I have, here are some more. Plenty to go around. I love you.